Two films from the early 2000s in the horror genre, both proved to be terrifying and were thus very successful at the box office. These films had something in common that goes beyond their scary scripts. They were both inspired by real-life events. This is Weird Wild Stories, and I discuss things that are strange, dark, and creepy. Today, I'll be talking about the film The Strangers from 2008 and Wolf Creek from 2005. If you like mysterious stories of all varieties, then go ahead and subscribe or follow me. I have a lot of creepy stories to binge and many more to come in the future. Okay, let's go ahead and get into the first story. On a quiet night in 2008, moviegoers everywhere were left gripping their seats, hearts racing, as The Strangers delivered one of the most chilling cinematic experiences in recent memory. But what if I told you the terror on screen wasn't just a creation of Hollywood imagination? The story was inspired by real events, three unsettling incidents that bled through the fiction. Let's start with the most infamous of the inspirations, the Manson family murders. In August of 1969, a seemingly ordinary night turned into one of the most horrific scenes in modern crime history. The brutal murders at actress Sharon Tate's home shocked the world. Charles Manson's followers, drug-fueled, detached from reality, and following the orders of their deranged leader, descended on the home, taking the lives of Tate, her unborn child, and 4 others. What's terrifying is how random the selection was. Tate and her friends weren't targeted for any personal vendetta, but were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Manson family murders remain a disturbing reminder of how pure evil can strike without reason. This concept of randomness would become a core theme in The Strangers, but the Manson killings weren't the only crime that inspired the movie. Enter the unsolved Keddie Cabin Murders of 1981, which took place in the quiet woods of Keddie, California. It was there that 3 people were murdered inside a cabin, while 2 others vanished without a trace. The brutality of the crime mirrored the random and unprovoked attacks seen in The Strangers. Despite countless theories and potential leads, the Keddie murders remain unsolved to this day, leaving behind a trail of questions and cold fear. Was it a random act of violence, or something more sinister, like the calculated attack of strangers who found the house by chance? The sense of helplessness, isolation, and confusion in the Keddie murders echoes through every tense scene of the film. Now, the final, and perhaps eeriest piece of the puzzle, is a personal experience of the movie's director, Brian Bertino. As a child, Bertino was home alone when a knock came at the door. When he answered, he was met with an unnerving sight. A group of strangers stood there, asking if someone he'd never heard of was home. The strangers left when he told them no one by that name lived there. But what happened afterward was the stuff of nightmares. Bertino later found out that several homes in the neighborhood had been broken into that night. The strangers hadn't come looking for someone. They were looking for victims. This childhood memory of being randomly targeted by strangers is what ignited the spark for The Strangers. It's terrifying because it's simple. The randomness, the anonymity of the attackers, just like the Manson family or the unsolved Keddie murders, it's what makes the terror so real. The Strangers brings those fears to life, blending true crime and horror in a way that leaves audiences questioning their own safety in the sanctity of their homes. Because sometimes, it's not personal. Sometimes, it's just the wrong knock at the door. In 2005, the Australian horror film Wolf Creek shocked audiences with its raw and brutal portrayal of travelers falling prey to a sadistic killer in the remote outback. The isolation, the desolation, and the sheer helplessness made for a terrifying movie. But as horrifying as it was, what makes Wolf Creek even more unsettling is that it's based on real-life crimes, events so disturbing that they became infamous across Australia. One of the main inspirations for Wolf Creek is the case of Ivan Milat, often referred to as the backpacker killer. Milat's killing spree began in the early 1990s, targeting young backpackers who were exploring the Australian wilderness. Milat would pick up his unsuspecting victims under the guise of offering them a ride, only to drive them deep into the bush where they would meet their tragic fates. Over the course of his reign of terror, Milat murdered at least 7 people, though it's believed there may have been more. The bodies of Milat's victims were found brutally mutilated, their remains scattered in remote locations. Milat didn't just kill his victims, he tortured them. Investigators found disturbing signs that his attacks were prolonged, filled with torment. For years, travelers disappeared without a trace until a grim discovery in the Belanglo State Forest in 1992. Human remains were found, sparking one of the largest manhunts in Australian history. Milat was eventually caught and sentenced to life in prison, but the horror of his crimes still lingers, casting a dark shadow over the Australian outback. It's easy to see the influence this real-life monster had on the character of Mick Taylor in Wolf Creek. But Ivan Milat wasn't the only real-life figure that inspired the film. The story also draws from another horrifying crime, the case of Bradley John Murdoch. In 2001, Murdoch attacked British backpackers Peter Falconio and Joanne Lees as they traveled through the Northern Territory. Falconio was shot and killed, while Lees managed to escape into the desert and hide. She was eventually found and rescued, but Falconio's body was never recovered. Murdoch was convicted of the crime, though the exact details of what happened remain shrouded in mystery, much like the fates of the characters in Wolf Creek. The parallels between these real-life events and Wolf Creek are chilling. Both Milat and Murdoch were predators who exploited the vastness and isolation of the Australian outback to commit their atrocities. In Wolf Creek, the killer takes advantage of the same remoteness, turning the landscape into a weapon of fear and control. The vastness of the Australian wilderness, where help is miles, if not days, away, becomes a central theme in both the real crimes and the fictionalized horror. What makes Wolf Creek so terrifying isn't just the brutality of the violence. It's the reality that these kinds of crimes have happened before. The film forces you to confront the unsettling truth that monsters do exist, and they sometimes thrive in the most remote, unsuspecting places. Whether in the haunting forests where Ivan Milat prowled, or on the desolate highways where Bradley Murdoch struck, the line between fact and fiction blurs in Wolf Creek. It reminds us that sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones that are made up, they're the ones that really happened.